The order was clear. The entire United States Embassy must leave Burkina Faso. But tell me, who else would dare tell the most powerful nation on earth to pack its bags? Who else would lower the stars and stripes and raise instead the banner of Africa's sovereignty? This was no small quarrel. It was thunder echoing from Washington to Paris, from Brussels to Moscow, and even Beijing. Was it madness? Or was it courage? Was it a reckless gamble? Or the first spark of real independence? And so, tonight in Ouagadougou, one question rises above all. Can a poor nation truly choose dignity over aid and still survive? Or must it forever bow to those who claim to write Africa's story? Captain Ibrahim Traoré made it clear. This wasn't just about shutting down an embassy. It was about breaking the chains of arrogance that had shackled the continent for generations. His words raced like fire through the Sahel, and the world was forced to ask, can he still be ignored? Stay with us. Because this story is not only about Burkina Faso, it is about the true cost of freedom. In the palace, Traore stood over a long oak table in Ouagadougou. A fresh American report lay spread before him. His aides watched as he flipped through the pages, each line marked with the sharp red strokes of his pen. Listen to this, he said, voice low but cutting. Burkina Faso armed forces, listed alongside extremist groups. The audacity stunned him. How could anyone equate soldiers who defended villages with the killers who carried out the Arbinda massacre? The Minister of Defense shifted uneasily. Perhaps. They do not understand our reality, he muttered. Not understand. Traore's hand slammed against the table. 2 million of our people have been driven from their homes since 2016. Did they not read the UN's own numbers? 2,000 civilians killed last year on our soil. And yet, from their safe halls in Washington, they dare write that our defenders are no different from those who slaughter children. He paused, his eyes burning. What arrogance writes such words? Far away, in Washington, the report was delivered with cold detachment, a mere bureaucratic exercise. But here, in Ouagadougou, for Traore it felt like a personal attack. He summoned his spokesman. Read it to the people, he ordered. Let every mother who buried a son hear how America names him. That evening, state television carried his fury. The United States claims our army violates human rights. But who gives America the authority to define our dignity? The broadcaster thundered. In the barracks of Kaya, young soldiers listened in silence, fists clenched. One muttered, so it's true, our captain is right. They call us criminal. Another spat bitterly. We fought in Jibo, in Yaga. We bled for our people. And yet they compare us to Al-Qaeda. Soon after, Traore convened his ministers. His voice filled the chamber. Every day, our fighters hold the line in Soon, in Udalan. They stop jihadists from tearing apart what schools remain. And what does America see? Numbers on paper. They count the children, but do they count the widows we leave behind? They speak of violations, but do they speak of martyrdom? Tell me, do they? The room was silent. Only the ceiling fan marked the seconds. This is bigger than legality. Traore pressed on, boots echoing on the tiles as he paced. This is about who controls the story. If we are branded as terrorists, what will remain of Burkina Faso's legacy? What story will our children inherit? Do we let others dictate our place, or do we claim it ourselves? Outside, protests swelled. Placards rose high. Sovereignty is not for sale. On the balcony of the palace, Traore raised his voice to the crowd. They call your soldiers criminals. I tell you, they are guardians. They fall so you may rise. Shall we kneel before distant capitals that know nothing of our wounds? The crowd roared back. No. Inside, an aide nervously reminded him of America's funding for food, medicine, schools. But Traore cut him off. Dignity bought with aid is no dignity at all. Better hunger with freedom than bread in humiliation. Do you not see? They want us to kneel so that their help feels like grace. But we are not beggars. We are a nation. The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Bold words, perhaps reckless, but undeniable in their power. That night, alone in his study, Traore gazed at the fading light. His voice dropped to a whisper, as though speaking to the whole nation. They call us poor, but we are not voiceless. They call us fragile, but we remain whole. To let this insult pass would betray every soldier who has fallen in the Sahel. He closed the report, pressing it flat against the table. The seed was planted, not in Washington, but here in Ouagadougou, and no one could predict what storm it would grow into. On August 18, 2025, the streets of Ouagadougou fell silent. Soldiers cordoned off the boulevard leading to the American embassy. Boots pressed into the dust, rifles slung across their shoulders. Behind the gates, embassy staff packed boxes in haste, faces pale beneath the burning Sahel sun. The blue, red, and white flag of the United States hung limply, waiting to be lowered. Inside the presidential compound, Captain Ibrahim Traoré spoke with a voice sharpened by conviction. "Write it clearly," he commanded. "The entire embassy, not just the ambassador. The United States has crossed a line. This is not an insult against one man, but against the whole nation. Burkina Faso would not tolerate such disrespect." The foreign minister hesitated. "Traore, something like this has never been done before. Expelling an entire embassy? The Americans will retaliate. Are we ready for the consequences?" Traore leaned forward, his palm striking the table with a thundering slap. "Ready? We are already bleeding. Last year, 2,000 of our citizens were killed by terrorists. More than 2 million are displaced, living in camps. And yet Washington writes reports that compare our soldiers to the very murderers who slaughter our people. Tell me, what consequence is worse than dishonor? What cost is higher than silence?" By midday, the order was signed. That evening, it was announced nationwide. The United States Embassy was declared unwelcome. Every staff member had 72 hours to leave. The American flag would no longer fly over Ouagadougou. Crowds surged toward the embassy gates as the news spread across the radios. When the Marines stepped forward to lower the stars and stripes, the air shook with chants. "Sovereignty is not for sale." Women ululated, youth waved Burkina flags, and elders raised their hands in prayer. The moment felt less like a diplomatic order and more like a funeral for an era of foreign dominance. In the square, a veteran leaning on a crutch raised his voice. "For years, they told us we were too weak to stand on our own. But now, our leader has proven them wrong. We are not ending ties with America. We are ending the arrogance that came with it." That night, Captain Traore addressed the nation from the presidential palace. His words cut like steel. "We are not expelling a building. We are expelling an attitude, the arrogance that has shackled Africa for too long. Aid without respect is bondage. Partnership without dignity is fraud. We choose dignity. Even if we must stand alone, we will stand as a nation, not as a colony." He paused, letting the silence weigh heavy before the cameras. "Some will call us reckless. But I ask you, was it reckless to defend the honor of those who die daily on the Sahel front lines? Is it irresponsible to promise our children that their inheritance will be pride, not a beggar's bowl?" As dawn broke on August 19th, a line of black SUVs rolled out of the embassy compound, escorted by security forces. Behind tinted windows, American diplomats watched the crowds lining the roads, chanting defiantly. The steel gates closed with a heavy clang for the last time. For the first time in decades, the most powerful nation on earth no longer had a foothold in Burkina Faso. Inside cabinet chambers, the mood turned tense. Traore, one minister warned, we risk losing hundreds of millions in American aid for our schools, our clinics, our programs. Traore raised his hand to silence him. Let them close their checkbooks. A school built on humiliation teaches only slavery. A clinic funded with contempt heals nothing. What legacy do we leave our children? That their lives are worth aid, but not dignity. The room fell silent. Outside, the last echoes of the departing motorcade faded into the night. Yet from the rooftops, the chant continued. Sovereignty is not for sale. By dawn in Washington, the State Department was in chaos. Screens glowed with images of the stars and stripes being lowered in Ouagadougou. An aide burst into the Situation Room. Mr. Secretary, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has expelled the entire embassy. This is not a dispute, it's a rupture. The secretary's voice was sharp. Draft a statement immediately. This is diplomatic suicide for Ouagadougou. Suspend all assistance if necessary. If they want isolation, let them pay the price. Within hours, American news networks blared the headline. Burkina Faso risks international isolation. Analysts warned that over $100 million in aid for health, food, and security could vanish overnight. In Ouagadougou, Captain Traore stood firm. Before his ministers, he declared, do they think we will sell dignity for dollars? Let them call it suicide. But what life is worth living without honor? In Paris, alarm spread quickly. France, already forced to retreat from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso by 2023, called the decision reckless. One diplomat whispered bitterly, Traore is cutting his final thread to Europe. In Brussels, statements were cautious, wrapped in careful language about isolation and cooperation. But in Ouagadougou, the response was sharper. Isolation from what? From change we never asked for. Moscow saw an opportunity. On state television, Traore was hailed as a man of courage. Foreign Minister Lavrov declared with deliberate weight, this is not madness. This is emancipation. Africa is showing it will not bow to neo-colonial dictates. Yet when an aide suggested aligning with Russia, Traore shook his head slowly. Let them applaud. But remember, our dignity is not for rent. We will not exchange one master for another. China, meanwhile, remained silent in public. But quietly, envoys arrived with offers of aid and partnership. The message was delivered without cameras. We do not interfere. We only partner. Traore studied the offer carefully. He told his ministers, look closely. The West threatens. Russia applauds. China observes. Each plays its game. But we must hold the board. Turkey acted differently, openly promising more schools, hospitals, and relief missions in the Sahel. A Turkish envoy stated proudly, Burkina Faso is not alone. We stand with you in faith and in progress. Inside the palace, Traore tapped his fingers on the table, reflecting. Did the world see them as reckless or as courageous? Was it madness to demand respect or bravery to walk away from dependency? Outside, the streets of Ouagadougou roared with chants. Banners were raised high, one reading in bold, our sovereignty is our survival. In Washington, senators grilled experts. If Burkina Faso can dismiss us, how many others will follow? The fear spread. What if Mali and Niger do the same? In Paris, newspapers painted Traore as a gambler striking a match in a powder keg. In Moscow, he was called the Young Lion. In Beijing, a lesson in patience. In Ankara, a brother in faith. But Traore reminded his ministers. Some predict collapse. Others praise us. Others stay silent. But none of them understand this. We are not performing for their approval. We are reclaiming our breath. Is it not time Africa speaks in its own voice, instead of repeating theirs? And then came the moment of transformation. On August 18th, when the American flag was lowered in silence, it was more than a piece of cloth being folded. It was the end of an old script, written not in Africa, but in Washington and Geneva. For decades, others had written who was victim, who was criminal, who was hero. That day, Burkina Faso tore that script apart. Inside the palace, Traore looked at his ministers. Tell me, who has written our story until now? Was it us bleeding in the Sahel dust, or men in suits who never set foot in our villages? Silence hung heavy until one admitted, it has always been them. Traore leaned in. No longer. From this day, we will write our own story. No one else will decide if our soldiers are heroes or villains. And outside, a new flag was raised. Not the stars and stripes, but the green and red of the AS Alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. The square filled with young voices chanting, Africa decides for Africa. At the embassy gates, silence. One flag lowered, another lifted by thousands of hands. An old veteran, leaning on his cane, watched the crowd and whispered, for too long, they called us beggars of aid. Today, we claim the dignity of creators. In Washington, an analyst sneered on live TV. Traore is not just reckless, he's trying to seize control of the narrative. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, the people already knew. The narrative was no longer America's to control. In Ouagadougou, Captain Traore faced the cameras with unshaken resolve. This is not just diplomacy, he declared. This is a struggle for the African voice. For too long, the West has claimed the power to define us. Today, we take that power back. He paused, his voice sharpening. When one of our soldiers dies defending Jibo or Kaya, do they call him a hero or a criminal? When our daughters are saved from extremists, are their rescuers honored or branded as abusers? Who gave them the right to decide what our reality is? The hall erupted in applause, but Traore lifted his hand. Listen to me. This battle is not only fought with weapons, it is fought with language. And words can wound deeper than any blade. The Americans call us violators. The Europeans warn of isolation. But who speaks of our sacrifice? Who counts the graves dug with bare hands in villages where 2 million of our people are displaced? His words carried through the night, echoing from radios in Bamako to loudspeakers in Niamey. Crowds lifted the AES flag high, chanting, no more borrowed voices. Later, in a strategy session, one advisor warned softly, Captain, the West controls the media. They shape global opinion. Traore's reply was sharp. Let them have their cameras. We will empower the voices of our own people. A child's song in Kaya holds more truth than 100 headlines from Washington. But the morning after the U.S. Embassy gates were sealed, whispers spread across Ouagadougou. In the markets, women fretted about food prices. In the clinics, doctors counted dwindling medicines. For years, the United States had funneled more than $100 million into health, farming, and schools. Now, all of it hung by a thread. Inside the council chamber, ministers argued anxiously. One stood and said, Captain, without American aid, our schools will collapse. Already 6,000 classrooms are shut from insecurity. What happens when the rest dry up? Traore's answer was measured but heavy with defiance. Then we must ask, if a classroom is built on subservience, is it truly a place of learning? Better to close a school for a day than to raise a generation trained to bow. Outside the palace walls, a farmer in the Sahel, without ever hearing the captain's words, spoke almost the same truth. His hands, hardened by dust and work, gripped a journalist's arm. We may starve, he said, but it is better to starve free than to eat in chains. In Washington, headlines screamed warnings. Burkina Faso on path to self-destruction. Officials threatened to cut aid. Analysts warned, without U.S. grain shipments, Malnutrition could strike within months. Was Traore gambling with children's meals? But in Ouagadougou's main square, students shouted back in defiance. We are poor, but we are free. We are small, but we decide. That same night, Traore convened his military council. Generals raised their concerns. Captain, without Western support, how will we fight the jihadists? Where will we get our equipment? Traore clasped his hands behind his back and stood tall. Do you not see? They give us rifles, but chain our tongues. They send us medicine, but poison our dignity. If Russia can send us weapons without humiliation, if China can build roads without lectures, why must we cling to those who despise us? The room stirred. Already Moscow had sent envoys praising his courage. Beijing, discreetly, extended new lines of trade. Ankara pledged more hospitals. And the Sahel Alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, promised to pool resources and strengthen their armies. Could hope be born in a place where aid was stripped away? One evening, Traore walked through a camp of displaced families. Over 2 million souls had been scattered by war. A child tugged on his sleeve, looking up with wide, uncertain eyes. Captain, will we have enough to eat? He knelt down, meeting the child's eyes. Maybe today we eat less, he whispered gently. But tomorrow, we will taste freedom. And freedom will feed the soul long after bread is gone. The crowd stood in silence, holding their breath until an elder broke it with trembling words. We buried too many sons to kneel again. Let hunger test us. It will not break us. That very night, state television broadcasted the scene. Commentators framed it not as weakness, but as leadership that stood shoulder to shoulder with the people. On radios across the villages, the child's words were repeated like prophecy. In Bamako, Mali's leaders declared, "This is the dawn of a Sahel that speaks for itself." In Niamey, Niger's generals vowed joint patrols with Burkina Faso. In Moscow, state media hailed Traore as the Lion of Sovereignty. In Beijing, no fiery statements were made, but quiet diplomacy deepened, silence itself becoming a signal of trust. The debate spread across continents. In Washington, analysts warned of famine and chaos. But in Ouagadougou, the question felt sharper. Was it worth risking hunger for dignity? Could foreign aid ever replace true autonomy? And when self-respect is gone, does food retain any flavor? By late August, murals appeared on city walls. They showed the American flag being lowered, and the AES banner rising with bold words beneath. We may have little, but it is ours. On the radio, one phrase echoed again and again. Burkina Faso, latest news. Sovereignty is not for sale. And in the dusty Sahel wind, Captain Traore's words linger. We are not choosing hunger, we are choosing freedom. The American flag at the embassy was lowered in silence. But on the very same boulevard, the AES flag rose high in the hands of chanting students. Africa rise! Africa rise! They shouted until their voices cracked. From the palace balcony, Traore watched the two images side by side, one fading, the other soaring. Do you see? He murmured to his advisors. We are not burying ourselves. We are planting a flag that will outlive us. The symbolism was clear. One power departed. Another vision was born. But questions lingered. Was this the beginning of true freedom, or the first step into perilous isolation? Could a poor nation really survive with dignity intact? Or would hunger test the very soul of its people? At the rally, an elder raised his hand and called out, Traore, you gave us back our pride. Even if the road is hard, we will walk it with you. The crowd erupted, chanting his words until they became a chorus, the sound of a continent reclaiming its voice. That night, broadcasters declared, this is Captain Ibrahim's latest news. A story not just of one man, but of a generation demanding to be heard. Across Africa, radios carried a single headline: Burkina Faso latest news. Dignity is not for sale. Later, a journalist turned to Traore and asked, Captain, history will ask what you chose, food or freedom. How will you answer? Traore looked into the camera without hesitation. I chose freedom, because without it, food turns to ash. This was Captain Ibrahim's latest news once again, echoing far beyond the Sahel. And now, the choice rests with you, watching this story. What does Africa's future mean to you? Do you see courage, or do you see risk? If this story touched you, do not let it fade into silence. Comment New Africa below. Share this voice so it cannot be buried. And subscribe because our history has been suppressed for too long. Together, we can ensure the world hears what Africa has to say.